Flames devoured the wooden beams of the Ramirez family ranch, turning the night sky into a hellish canvas of orange and red. The crackling of fire drowned out all other sounds except for a desperate cry that pierced through the chaos. The boy's still inside. The woman stood motionless before the inferno, her veiled face illuminated by the dancing flames. The heat pressed against her skin, but she didn't flinch. Within her eyes, the reflection of fire stirred something dormant, a memory she had buried deep. Her gloved hands moved to the edge of her veil, hesitating for just a moment before letting it fall away. The man beside her reached out, his weathered hand grasping her arm. "Hannah, no!" His voice broke with fear, but she had already broken free from his grip, running straight into the wall of flames. The man's face contorted with horror as he watched her disappear into the burning building. The fire roared higher, a sudden explosion of light washing everything in blinding white. 6 months earlier, Dry Creek, New Mexico territory, autumn 1878. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dry Creek's main street, painting the dusty buildings in shades of amber and gold. Nathaniel Hayes stood at the stagecoach station, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. In his rough hands, he held a small bouquet of wild prairie flowers, their delicate petals in odd contrast to his calloused skin. His blue eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his worn hat, scanned the horizon for any sign of the approaching coach. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple despite the autumn chill, and he wiped it away with the back of his hand, revealing a long scar that ran from his wrist halfway up his forearm, a memento from a war that had ended years ago but still raged within him. "I wrote her 7 letters, Nathaniel thought to himself, his inner voice steady despite his racing heart. But nothing could prepare me for today. The distant rumble of wheels drew his attention. The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, a cloud of red dust billowing in its wake like a comet's tail. Nathaniel straightened his clean but faded shirt, tucked the wildflowers into one hand, and drew a deep breath. As the stagecoach approached, the sounds of Dry Creek faded into the background. The blacksmith's hammer, the saloon piano, the chatter from the general store, all replaced by the thundering of his own heartbeat. Inside the stagecoach, Hannah Sullivan sat rigidly, her gloved hands folded in her lap. The lace veil attached to her modest bonnet concealed her features from forehead to chin, allowing her to observe the passing landscape without being observed in return. Between her fingers, she turned a tarnished military badge, the name William Sullivan barely visible through years of wear. A memory flashed unbidden, white tents arranged in rows, the smell of blood and antiseptic, her hands moving swiftly to staunch a wound as cannon fire thundered in the distance. Hannah closed her eyes, willing the images away. She tucked the badge into the pocket of her dress, close to her heart, its weight a familiar comfort. "They say in the West, you can start again," she thought, watching the small town of Dry Creek emerge from the dusty plains. But some wounds never heal. The stagecoach began to slow, and Hannah straightened her back, gathering her courage for what lay ahead. She had crossed a continent to reach this place, fleeing not just from Boston, but from the whispers and stares, from a life that had become unbearable after the war. Through the window, she caught sight of a tall man standing apart from the small crowd, wildflowers clutched awkwardly in one hand. Nathaniel Hayes, her husband-to-be, though they had never met. A stranger who would soon be the closest person in her world. The stagecoach ground to a halt, dust settling around its wheels. Nathaniel removed his hat as the driver secured the brake and climbed down to open the door. A slender boot appeared first, followed by the hem of a gray traveling dress. Then she emerged, Hannah Sullivan, his mail-order bride. She stood before him, smaller than he had imagined from her letters, but with a certain straightness to her posture that suggested strength. The veil obscured her face, but he could see her eyes through the lace, clear and observant, taking his measure as surely as he took hers. "Welcome to Dry Creek, Miss Sullivan," Nathaniel said, his voice quiet but steady. Hannah nodded once, a slight movement. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice surprised him, low and melodious, with an Eastern refinement that seemed out of place in the rugged surroundings of New Mexico territory. She clutched a small carpet bag in her hands, knuckles white beneath her gloves. "I can carry that for you," he offered, extending his hand toward her bag. "No, thank you," she replied firmly. "I prefer to manage my own belongings." Nathaniel nodded, respecting her wishes. We should stop at Wilson's General Store before heading to the ranch. It's a fair ride and you might want to pick up a few things. They walked side by side down the dusty street, an appropriate distance between them. Nathaniel was acutely aware of the eyes following them. Dry Creek had few secrets, and the arrival of his mail-order bride was the most interesting thing to happen in months. Hannah kept her eyes forward, but she felt the weight of the stairs, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. She had hoped to escape such scrutiny in the West, but human nature, it seemed, was the same everywhere. The bell above the door jingled as they entered Wilson's General Store. Charlotte Wilson, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, paused in her arrangement of fabric bolts to assess the newcomer. "So this is the bride," she said, her tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "Come all the way from Boston, have you?" "Yes, ma'am," Hannah replied politely. "Well, we don't stand on ceremony much here in Dry Creek," Charlotte continued, moving behind the counter. "What can I help you with today?" "Well, we don't stand on ceremony much here in Dry Creek," Charlotte continued, moving behind the counter. "What can I help you with today?" As Charlotte gathered supplies, her efficient movements belied the keen observation in her eyes. "My Albert came west with consumption," she offered unexpectedly, measuring fabric with practiced hands. "Doctors in Philadelphia gave him 6 months. Lived 15 years out here before the good Lord called him home." She glanced at Hannah's veil, not with curiosity but with understanding. "Found my own kind of freedom in Dry Creek. Most folks here are running to something or from something, sometimes both." A small, genuine smile softened her previously stern features. "That's the beauty of this place. Nobody much cares what you were before. It's what you do now that counts." Hannah felt a surprising rush of gratitude for this unexpected kindness, this acknowledgement of new beginnings offered without prying questions. While Hannah examined bolts of fabric and selected a few necessities, the door swung open again. While Hannah examined bolts of fabric and selected a few necessities, the door swung open again, bringing with it a gust of autumn air and 3 men. The atmosphere in the store immediately tensed. The leader of the group stood taller than the others, with broad shoulders and a face that might have been handsome once, before life had carved bitterness into its lines. A jagged scar ran through his right eyebrow and down his cheek, narrowly missing his eye. He spotted Nathaniel and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Well, if it isn't the shaky doctor," he drawled. "Heard you were getting a wife, had to see it for myself." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond, keeping his eyes fixed on a shelf of canned goods. The man's attention shifted to Hannah. He moved closer, deliberately invading her space. "So you're Hayes's mail-order bride. What did he tell you about himself in those letters? Did he mention his special talents?" "Ezra," Charlotte cut in sharply, "I won't have trouble in my store." Ezra Blackwood ignored her, his eyes fixed on Hannah's veiled face. "Curious choice hiding behind that veil. What are you hiding from, darling?" Hannah turned to face him squarely, her posture rigid. "I'm not hiding, Mr. Blackwood. I simply don't have time for men who weren't invited into my conversation." A surprised chuckle escaped one of Ezra's companions. Ezra's eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer to Hannah. "A veiled wife for a shaky doctor," he said softly, menace underlying his words. "How fitting. Match made in heaven, I'd say." Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself between Hannah and Ezra. His eyes held a warning, but Ezra just laughed and stepped back. "Come on, boys," he said to his companions. "Let's leave the good doctor to his new bride. I'm sure they have plenty to discuss." As they left, Hannah noticed how tightly Nathaniel gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white with tension. Something had passed between the two men that went beyond simple dislike. There was history there, raw and unresolved. Through the window, she watched Blackwood mount his horse, the man's face momentarily softening as he reached down to pat the animal's neck with surprising gentleness. For just a breath, Hannah glimpsed something else beneath the cruelty, perhaps loss or regret, before his features hardened again into their customary sneer. Charlotte, following her gaze, sighed quietly. "Ezra wasn't always like this," she murmured, almost to herself. "The war changed many men, some worse than others." The ride to Nathaniel's ranch took them past open range dotted with scrub brush and scattered pines. Hannah breathed in the unfamiliar scents, sage, dust, and pine, so different from Boston's coal smoke and syrup air. As they crested a small rise, Nathaniel pulled the wagon to a stop. There, he said, pointing to a weathered but well-maintained farmhouse on a gentle slope. That's home. Not much to look at, but it's solid. Before Hannah could respond, movement caught her eye. A man was working on a broken fence about 100 yards from the road. He looked up at the sound of their wagon and raised his hand in greeting. Our neighbor, Nathaniel explained, returning the wave. Gabriel Ramirez. Only neighbor for 5 miles in any direction, actually. He guided the wagon toward the fence line. As they approached, Gabriel straightened up, removing his hat. He was a man in his early 40s with skin weathered by sun and work, but his smile was genuine as they pulled up beside him. Nathaniel, he greeted, then turned curious eyes to Hannah. And this must be your bride. Welcome to our little corner of nowhere, Senora. Gabriel, this is Hannah Sullivan, Nathaniel introduced. Hannah, Gabriel Ramirez. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Ramirez, Hannah replied politely. Gabriel's smile widened. Just Gabriel, please. We don't stand on formality out here. He turned and called over his shoulder. Sophia, Daniel, come meet Nathaniel's wife. From the modest adobe house beyond the fence emerged a woman and a young boy. Sophia Ramirez approached with a warm smile, wiping her hands on her apron. Beside her walked a boy of about 10, wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, shadowing his features. Welcome, Sophia said, her English accented but clear. We are happy you have come. Nathaniel has been alone too long. Hannah nodded in thanks, but her attention was drawn to the boy, Daniel, who kept his face angled away from her, the hat's brim casting a deep shadow. The way he positioned himself, always turning so his left side was away from view, sparked a professional recognition in Hannah. She had seen this behavior before in soldiers who carried visible wounds. The fence? Nathaniel asked, changing the subject. Gabriel's expression darkened slightly. Broken again, 3rd time this month. Blackwood's men? Gabriel shrugged, but his eyes held certainty. No proof, but who else would bother? Nathaniel frowned. I'll speak to Sheriff Cooper. And say what? That we found our fence cut again? Gabriel shook his head. The sheriff is a good man, but without proof. Hannah observed the exchange silently, noting the undercurrent of tension. There was more happening here than a simple neighborly dispute. How is the horse breeding going? Nathaniel asked, clearly trying to move to safer ground. Gabriel's expression brightened. Good. The new stallion is strong. Come by next week and see the foals. As the men talked, Hannah noticed Daniel watching her from beneath his hat brim. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, adjusting his hat to keep his face in shadow. We should get going, Nathaniel said finally. It's been a long day for Hannah. They said their goodbyes, and as the wagon pulled away, Hannah turned to look back. Daniel stood watching them go, one hand holding his hat in place against the wind, the other hanging at his side. Something about the boy tugged at her heart, a recognition of a kindred spirit perhaps, though she couldn't have explained why. Nathaniel's house stood alone on a small hill, its weathered, clapboard walls sturdy against the elements. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides, and nearby stood a barn and corral where several horses grazed. It wasn't grand, but it had a certain dignity, a home built by someone who cared about craftsmanship. It's not much, Nathaniel said as he helped Hannah down from the wagon, careful not to touch her more than necessary. But it's peaceful. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and plain curtains. Nathaniel showed her to a bedroom that had clearly been prepared for her arrival. Fresh linens on the bed, a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser, a pitcher and bowl for washing. My room is across the hall, he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. You'll have your privacy. I sleep in the barn sometimes when I'm working late with the horses or when someone needs medical attention. Hannah turned to him, surprised. Medical attention? Nathaniel gestured toward a corner of the main room that she hadn't noticed before. A cabinet stood against the wall, and beside it, a small table covered with a clean cloth. Several books were stacked neatly nearby, their spines bearing medical titles. I keep some supplies, he explained. Nothing fancy, just enough to help when needed. The nearest real doctor is in Santa Fe, 2 days' ride. Hannah moved closer to examine the makeshift medical corner. The The cabinet, when she opened it with a questioning glance at Nathaniel, contained neatly arranged bandages, bottles of antiseptic, and basic surgical tools. All were well maintained and organized with a professional's care. "You're a doctor?" she asked. "Was," Nathaniel replied, his voice suddenly flat. "During the war. Not anymore." The curtness of his answer suggested this was not a topic for further discussion. Hannah nodded and closed the cabinet, respecting his boundary. She had her own secrets, after all, her own past that she preferred to leave undisturbed. She moved to the window, looking out at the vast landscape that stretched to the distant mountains. The emptiness was both terrifying and liberating, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, where there was always someone watching, always whispers following her veiled face. "I'll let you rest," Nathaniel said from the doorway. "Supper in an hour if you're hungry." When she turned to respond, he was already gone, his footsteps receding down the hallway. The first week passed slowly, each day establishing their cautious routine. Hannah rose at dawn to prepare breakfast. Nathaniel tended to his horses until dusk, their paths crossing in measured, polite exchanges that rarely ventured beyond the necessities of shared living. That evening, Hannah stood on the porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. She had never seen so many stars, had never realized how bright they could be without the competing glow of city lights. The vastness of the heavens made her feel small, but not insignificant, rather part of something greater than herself. She heard the soft creak of the porch boards before she saw Nathaniel. He approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance, and extended a steaming cup toward her. "Tea," he explained. "Thought you might be cold." Hannah accepted the cup, grateful for its warmth against her fingers. "Thank you." They stood in silence, side by side but not close, each gazing up at the star-filled void. The quiet between them wasn't entirely uncomfortable, more contemplative, as if they were each taking the measure of this new reality they had created through their letters and promises. "Why did you agree to marry a man you'd never met?" Nathaniel asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Hannah considered the question, weighing how much truth to offer. "Because sometimes," she replied slowly, "the only thing worse than pain is loneliness." Nathaniel nodded as if her answer made perfect sense to him. Perhaps it did. There was something in his bearing, in the quiet way he moved through his home, that spoke of long familiarity with solitude. The moonlight illuminated his profile, strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that seemed to hold more than they revealed. Not a handsome man in the conventional sense, but a substantial one, someone who had weathered storms and remained standing. As October gave way to November, bringing cooler winds and shorter days, Hannah found herself gradually adjusting to the rhythm of ranch life. 2 weeks into her arrival, the careful distance between them remained, yet something in the air had subtly shifted. Hannah was struck by the realization that this man, this stranger, was now her husband in name, would someday perhaps be her husband in truth. The thought should have frightened her, but instead she felt an unexpected calm. Nathaniel Hayes might be unknown to her, but he was not unknown to himself. There was a certainty in his movements, a deliberateness that suggested he knew exactly who he was. Even if that person carried burdens he preferred not to name. What struck her most was that when he looked at her, his eyes never lingered on her veil. Unlike everyone else she had encountered since the war, he did not stare at the cloth that concealed her face, did not seem consumed with curiosity about what lay beneath. Instead, he looked into her eyes when they spoke, as if the veil were simply not there. Later that night, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, Hannah rose and moved quietly through the silent house. The moonlight streaming through the windows provided enough illumination to navigate without a lamp. She found herself drawn to Nathaniel's medical corner, curious about this aspect of the man she had married. The cabinet was unlocked and she opened it again, examining the contents more thoroughly. Everything was organized with methodical precision, bandages rolled tightly, instruments aligned perfectly, bottles arranged by size and purpose, the work of a disciplined mind. Her fingers traced over the instruments, familiar from her own days in field hospitals. How many wounds had these tools mended? How many lives had they saved? Or failed to save? Below the cabinet, she noticed a drawer that was slightly ajar. Hesitating only briefly, this was, after all, her home now, too. She pulled it open. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its cover worn from handling. She knew she shouldn't look, but something compelled her to open it. The first page bore a simple inscription: Medical Unit, 27th Regiment, 1864. The handwriting was precise, almost artistic in its clarity. She turned a few pages, scanning the entries, medical notes, primarily, but interspersed with personal observations. One entry caught her eye. Today, I couldn't save him. My hands shook too badly. Shame washed over her at this invasion of privacy, and she began to close the journal. As she did, something slipped from between its pages. A photograph, yellowed with age. She caught it before it could fall to the floor and was about to replace it when the image registered. It showed Nathaniel in a Union Army medical uniform, standing beside a young soldier. The soldier was smiling broadly, arms slung around Nathaniel's shoulders with casual camaraderie. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. She knew that face, had known it all her life. William Sullivan, her brother. The shock was like ice water in her veins. How was this possible? What cruel twist of fate had led her across a continent to marry the very man who couldn't sleep? Nathaniel's voice from the doorway startled her so badly she nearly dropped the photograph. She turned, clutching the journal and photo against her chest, guilt and confusion written plainly in her posture. Nathaniel's eyes moved from her face to the journal in her hands, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger exactly, but a shuddering, as if he were closing a door between them. "I'm sorry," Hannah stammered. "I shouldn't have." But Nathaniel had already seen the photograph in her hand. His face paled in the moonlight. Morning brought an uncomfortable silence between them. Hannah prepared breakfast, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency despite her unfamiliarity with the space. Nathaniel entered just as she was placing plates on the table. "I see you found my journal," he said without preamble. Hannah straightened, facing him directly. "I shouldn't have looked. It was wrong of me." Nathaniel poured himself coffee from the pot warming on the stove. "I was a field surgeon during the Civil War," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Not something I'm proud of." Hannah's hands stilled on the plates. "Why not? Saving lives is honorable work." A bitter smile ghosted across Nathaniel's face. "Not when you fail as often as I did." Hannah wanted desperately to ask about William, to demand answers about the photograph, but something in Nathaniel's closed expression stopped her. Instead, she said, "We all have parts of our past we'd rather forget." Nathaniel looked at her directly then, his eyes moving briefly to her veiled face. "I don't ask about your veil," he said quietly, "and you don't ask about my journal." That seems fair. It wasn't a request but a statement, the terms of their coexistence laid plainly before her. Hannah nodded once, accepting the boundary, but her mind whirled with questions. Had Nathaniel known who she was when they corresponded? Was this some elaborate form of penance on his part? Or was it truly coincidence? The random cruelty of a universe that seemed determined to keep her tethered to that terrible day when flames had taken both her brother and her future. The morning passed in a blur of domestic tasks. Hannah found comfort in the routine of cleaning and organizing, learning the layout of her new home. Nathaniel left after breakfast, mentioning work with the horses, and Hannah was grateful for the solitude. She needed time to process the shock of the photograph, to decide what to do with this new knowledge. By mid-afternoon, restlessness drove her outside. On impulse, she gathered the jar of salve she had mixed that morning from herbs she found in Nathaniel's supplies and set off toward the Ramirez home. Sophia answered her knock with surprise that quickly warmed to welcome. "Mrs. Hayes, please, come in." "Hannah, please," she corrected gently, stepping into the modest but immaculate home. "I brought something for Daniels, for his face." Sophia's smile faltered slightly. "How did you know?" "I've worked with Burns before," Hannah said carefully. "I noticed how he keeps that side in shadow." Sophia nodded slowly, studying Hannah with new interest. "You have a healer's eyes, I think." She turned and called into the house. "Daniel, come, we have a visitor." The boy appeared from another room, hat already positioned to shield the left side of his face. He hung back, eyeing Hannah warily. Hannah knelt down to his level, keeping a respectful distance. "Hello, Daniel. I brought something that might help with the pain. It's made from herbs that grow right here." Daniel remained where he was, suspicious but curious. Sophia gently encouraged him forward. "It's all right, mijo. Mrs. Hayes wants to help." Hannah didn't press, instead beginning to tell a story about the stars, how sailors used them to find their way home, how each constellation had a story behind it. She spoke softly, her voice weaving pictures of heroes and beasts in the night sky, watching as Daniel gradually relaxed, drawn in by the tale. When she finished, Daniel had moved closer without realizing it. "Do you know more stories?" he asked, the first words he had spoken to her. "Many," Hannah replied with a smile in her voice. "I could teach you to read them yourself, if you'd like." Daniel considered this, then with a decisive movement, pushed his hat back slightly, allowing her to see what he had been hiding. A burn scar that covered much of the left side of his face, pulling the corner of his eye and mouth into a permanent grimace. Hannah didn't flinch, didn't look away. She met his eyes steadily, with the same matter-of-fact acceptance she had shown countless wounded soldiers. "May I?" she asked, holding up the jar of salve. Daniel nodded and Hannah gently applied the balm to his scarred skin. "This will cool the burning feeling and help the skin stay soft," she explained as she worked. "Burns keep hurting long after the fire is gone." "You know about burns?" Daniel asked. Hannah's fingers stilled for just a moment. "Yes," she said softly, "I do." Sophia watched from nearby, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It was a fire at our old home in Mexico," she explained quietly. Daniel was the only child who survived. Hannah's heart ached at the implications, but she kept her hand steady, focusing on her task. "You're very brave, Daniel," she said. "It takes courage to show your scars to others." When she finished, Daniel didn't immediately pull away or replace his hat. Instead, he studied her veiled face with open curiosity now. "Why do you wear that?" he asked with a child's directness. "Are you hiding too?" "Daniel." Sophia scolded, but Hannah raised a hand. "It's all right," she assured Sophia, then turned back to Daniel. "Yes, in a way, but perhaps I'm learning that hiding isn't always necessary." As she prepared to leave, Sophia pressed a small basket of fresh eggs and herbs into her hands. "Thank you," the woman said simply, but her eyes conveyed deeper gratitude. Hannah nodded, understanding the unspoken message. In this vast, empty country, neighbors looked after one another. It wasn't charity, it was survival. On the walk back to Nathaniel's, to her home, she corrected herself, Hannah felt a curious lightness. For the first time in years, she had used her medical knowledge openly, had acknowledged her expertise without fear of questions about where and how she had gained it. And in Daniel's scarred face, she had recognized something of herself, the daily courage required to face a world that preferred its damaged things hidden away. By mid-November, after nearly a month at the ranch, Hannah's visits to the Ramirez family had become a comforting ritual twice each week. The hours spent teaching Daniel provided structure to her days, while the evenings at home with Nathaniel slowly grew less strained, silence becoming companionable rather than tense. When she returned, she found Nathaniel at his workbench on the covered porch, mending a piece of tack. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You went to the Ramirez place," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I brought salve for Daniel's burns." She set the basket of eggs and herbs on the bench. "Sophia sent these." Nathaniel examined the contents of the basket, then looked back at her. "You know about treating burns." Again, not a question. Hannah stood straighter, feeling a strange defiance rise within her. "I know about many injuries, Mr. Hayes, just as you know about the boy's condition without being told." But something shifted in Nathaniel's gaze, a reluctant respect perhaps. "Were you a nurse before?" he asked, the first direct question he had posed about her past. Hannah considered her answer carefully. "In Boston, I taught at a girls' school," she said, which was true if incomplete. "But yes, I have some medical knowledge." Nathaniel nodded slowly, returning to his work. After a moment, he said without looking up, "Daniel is a good boy, smart too, never had much chance for schooling." Hannah understood the implicit suggestion. "I've offered to teach him to read properly, if that's acceptable to you." Nathaniel's hands stilled on the leather strap he was mending. "Why wouldn't it be acceptable?" "Some husbands have opinions about how their wives spend their time." Nathaniel looked up then, meeting her eyes directly. "I didn't bring you here to be a prisoner, Miss Sullivan. You're free to come and go as you please, to make friends, to teach if you want to. I may have paid for your passage, but I didn't buy you." The bluntness of his statement surprised her, but also brought unexpected relief. Whatever else Nathaniel Hayes might be, He was not a man who sought to control or to confine her. "Thank you," she said simply. Nathaniel returned to his work, but after a moment he spoke again, his voice softer. "Your medical knowledge, it might be useful here. There's no doctor for miles and people get hurt." It was an olive branch of sorts, an acknowledgement of her skills, an invitation to use them openly. Hannah felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a tentative tendril of hope. Perhaps here, in this remote place with this quiet man, she could reclaim some part of herself that had been lost in the smoke and fire of war. "I'd be glad to help where I can," she replied. As she turned to go inside, Hannah realized with a start that for the first time since arriving, she had forgotten about the weight of the veil against her skin. For a brief, shining moment, she had simply been herself, not a creature to be hidden away, but a woman with skills and purpose. The revelation was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had crossed a continent to escape her past, only to find herself circling back to it. But perhaps, she thought, some circles were meant to be completed. Perhaps some journeys led not away from pain, but through it to something else entirely. Inside, as she prepared vegetables for supper, Hannah's fingers brushed against the pocket where William's badge rested. Her brother, always laughing, always kind, had been the best of them all. He hadn't deserved to die so young, so far from home. And Nathaniel Hayes had known him, had stood beside him, smiling in that photograph. What had happened after that picture was taken? What had transpired between these two men? One now her husband, the other forever her beloved brother. Hannah's knife paused above the carrot she was slicing. She had agreed not to ask about Nathaniel's past, just as he had agreed not to ask about her veil. But how long could such an agreement stand when William's ghost seemed to hover between them, demanding acknowledgement? For now, she decided, she would honor their pact of silence. But sooner or later, truth would demand its due. And when that day came, she wondered if either of them would be strong enough to face it. The following days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Hannah rose early each morning to find a cup of tea waiting on the porch railing, still warm, and Nathaniel already at work with the horses. They shared meals in relative silence, exchanging information about practical matters, a fence that needed mending, supplies running low, weather changes on the horizon. It was a careful dance of proximity without intimacy, each respecting the other's boundaries while navigating the strange reality of being strangers bound by marriage. Twice a week, Hannah visited the Ramirez family. Daniel proved an eager student, soaking up her lessons in reading and basic arithmetic with a quickness that impressed her. More surprising was his interest in her medical knowledge. When she cleaned and dressed his burns, he peppered her with questions about the herbs in her salve, how wounds healed, why scars formed. "You know a lot," he observed one afternoon as she showed him how to fold bandages properly. "Like Mr. Hayes." Hannah's hand stilled momentarily. "Mr. Hayes is knowledgeable about medicine?" Daniel nodded enthusiastically. "He fixed my arm when I fell from the hayloft last spring. He knew just how to set the bone. Papa says he was a real doctor in the war." "Did he tell you that?" Hannah asked, careful to keep her tone casual. "No," Daniel admitted. "He doesn't talk about the war. Papa told me. He said Mr. Hayes has saving hands but a heavy heart." Out of the mouths of children, Hannah thought, the most piercing truths often came. A heavy heart indeed, she had seen evidence of it in the careful way Nathaniel moved through his days, as if carrying an invisible burden. "Your papa is a wise man," she told Daniel, resuming her demonstration. "Now tell me again how we clean a wound before bandaging it." Autumn deepened, painting the sparse trees in shades of gold and rust. Hannah found herself settling into life at the ranch with unexpected ease. The physicality of the work, gardening, canning, mending, was a welcome distraction from the questions that still haunted her quiet moments. One evening, unable to sleep, she wandered into the main room to find Nathaniel sitting at the table, reading by lamplight. An old medical text lay open before him, its pages yellowed with age. He looked up at her approach, closing the book. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "The wind," she explained, gesturing toward the windows where autumn gusts rattled the glass. "It's different from city sounds." Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Took me months to get used to it when I first came here. Now city noise would keep me awake. Hannah hesitated, then sat across from him at the table. This was the longest conversation they'd had in days. What were you reading? Just refreshing my memory on setting fractures. Gabriel mentioned one of his horses pulled up lame. Hannah glanced at the book, recognizing it as a standard medical text. Without thinking, she said, "For a simple break, a splint of two straight pieces of wood bound firmly but not too tight, with padding to protect the skin from chafing. Change the bandage daily to check for infection, especially in livestock." Nathaniel looked at her with surprise. She had revealed more of her knowledge than she intended. But instead of questioning her expertise, he simply nodded. "That's right," he said quietly, then added, "You'd be a good doctor." "Women aren't allowed in medical school," she replied, an old bitterness tinging her voice. "That doesn't mean they wouldn't make good doctors." Their eyes met across the table, a moment of genuine connection in the lamplight. For the first time, Hannah felt a flicker of something beyond the careful politeness that had characterized their interactions. A recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. The moment stretched between them, fragile and unexpected. Then the wind gusted sharply, causing the lamp flame to jump, and the spell was broken. "I should try to sleep," Hannah said, rising from the table. "Good night, Miss Sullivan," Nathaniel replied, returning to his book. She paused at the doorway. "You could call me Hannah," she offered. "We are married, after all." He looked up, his expression impossible to read in the shadowed room. "Good night, Hannah," he amended softly. It was a small thing, this exchange of her name, but as Hannah returned to her room, she felt as if some invisible barrier had been lowered, ever so slightly, between them. As November drew to a close, the first frost dusted the prairie grass with silver. 6 weeks had passed since Hannah's arrival, yet only now did she feel the first tentative threads of connection forming between them, delicate as spider silk, but surprisingly resilient. The following morning, Hannah decided to accompany Nathaniel into town for supplies. The ride was mostly silent, but not uncomfortably so. Hannah found herself watching Nathaniel's hands on the reins, steady, capable hands that moved with precision. Hard to imagine them trembling, as Ezra had implied with his taunting, shaky doctor remark. Dry Creek looked different in the clear autumn light, less intimidating than it had on her arrival. The general store, the small church, the sheriff's office, and the saloon formed the town's modest center, with scattered houses and businesses stretching along the main road. As they pulled up to Wilson's general store, Nathaniel helped Hannah down from the wagon, his touch brief but respectful. "I need to speak with Sheriff Cooper," he said. "Will you be all right on your own for a while?" "Of course," Hannah replied, straightening her skirts. "I'm quite capable of buying flour and coffee without supervision." A small smile tugged at the corner of Nathaniel's mouth, the first she'd seen from him. "I never doubted it," he said, then headed toward the sheriff's office. Inside the store, Charlotte Wilson greeted Hannah with a nod that was fractionally warmer than on her first visit. "Mrs. Hayes," she acknowledged, settling in. "Yes, thank you," Hannah replied, handing over her list of needed supplies. As Charlotte gathered the items, she kept up a steady stream of local gossip. Who was expecting a baby, whose roof had leaked in the last rain, which ranch was selling off stock. Hannah listened with half an ear until a name caught her attention. "And Ezra Blackwood's been making trouble again at the Ramirez place," Charlotte was saying. "Sheriff Cooper warned him off twice this week already." Hannah's head snapped up. "What kind of trouble?" Charlotte seemed pleased to have captured her interest. "Oh, the usual. Claims Gabriel's horses are straying onto his grazing land. Everyone knows it's nonsense. Gabriel keeps his fences mended better than anyone, but Blackwood's had it in for them since they arrived." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Some say it's because he doesn't like Mexicans owning good land. Others think it's more personal." "Personal how?" Hannah asked. Charlotte shrugged, "Rigged. Hard to say. But Blackwood and your husband have bad blood between them going back years. And Nathaniel helped the Ramirez family get settled when they first came." Before Hannah could inquire further, the bell above the door jingled. A tall, weathered man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest entered, followed by Nathaniel. Sheriff Cooper nodded politely to the women. "Mrs. Hayes," he greeted Hannah, "good to see you out and about. How are you finding Dry Creek?" "Quite different from Boston," Hannah replied diplomatically, "but not unpleasantly so." Cooper smiled, crow's feet crinkling around his eyes. High praise indeed. He turned to Charlotte. Got any of that coffee left, Mrs. Wilson? The kind that doesn't taste like it was brewed in an old boot? As Charlotte huffed and went to fetch the coffee, Cooper leaned closer to Hannah and Nathaniel, his voice dropping. I had a word with Blackwood like you asked, Nathaniel. Warned him about trespassing on Ramirez land. But I can't be everywhere at once, and he's got those two troublemakers, Pike and Dawson, riding with him. Thank you, Thomas, Nathaniel said. I appreciate it. Cooper glanced at Hannah, seeming to consider his next words carefully. There's something else. Blackwood's been asking questions about your wife. Hannah felt a chill run through her. What sort of questions? Where you came from, whether you worked during the war. Cooper's eyes, kind but shrewd, studied her veiled face, almost as if he's looking for something specific. Hannah's throat went dry. How could Ezra Blackwood possibly know anything about her? She'd never met the man before arriving in Dry Creek. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Blackwood should mind his own business. Just thought you should know, Cooper said, straightening as Charlotte returned with his coffee. Be careful, both of you. Blackwood's not one to let go of a grudge. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Hannah felt eyes on her. Looking up, she saw Ezra Blackwood watching from across the street, leaning against the hitching post outside the saloon. He touched the brim of his hat in a mock salute, his smile cold beneath his scarred brow. Hannah turned away, but the sensation of being watched lingered, raising goose flesh on her arms despite the warm afternoon sun. On the ride home, Hannah finally broke the silence. What exactly is your history with Ezra Blackwood? Nathaniel's hands tightened on the reins. That's a question about my past. It concerns the present as well, Hannah countered, especially if he's asking questions about me. Nathaniel was quiet so long that Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. We served in the same regiment, different capacities. I was with the medical unit, he was infantry. He paused, then added reluctantly, there was an incident, a field hospital overrun, patients lost. Blackwood blames me. Hannah studied Nathaniel's profile. And before the incident? She asked carefully. A shadow of something like grief passed across Nathaniel's face. Before, we were almost friends. Ezra had a younger brother in my care, bright boy studying medicine before the war. Ezra visited him daily, brought him books, told him stories from their childhood. He was different then. When the artillery hit and the hospital caught fire, Nathaniel swallowed hard. His brother was among those we couldn't save. Ezra was pulled from the flames himself, hence the scar. I think sometimes it's easier for him to hate me than to face his own helplessness that night. For what? Hannah pressed. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For not being the doctor I should have been. It was clearly all he intended to say on the matter, but it was enough to connect certain pieces in Hannah's mind. Ezra Blackwood had served with Nathaniel during the war, perhaps had even known William. His animosity toward Nathaniel suggested he might have witnessed whatever had happened to her brother. And the Ramirez family, she asked, changing tack, what is Blackwood's quarrel with them? That's simpler, Nathaniel replied, seeming relieved at the shift in topic. Blackwood works for the Western Rail Company now. They want to put a line through this valley, and Gabriel's pain that stands in a convenient path, but Gabriel won't sell. So he's trying to intimidate them into leaving? Nathaniel nodded grimly. Seems that way. It's an old story out here. Big companies using any means to get the land they want. Hannah thought of Daniel, of the careful way Gabriel and Sophia had rebuilt their lives after whatever tragedy had driven them from Mexico. It's wrong, she said firmly. They have a right to their home. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, a hint of warmth entering his voice. They do. For the rest of the journey, they rode in a silence that felt for the first time like companionship rather than avoidance. The early December days grew shorter and colder as the season deepened. 2 months into their arrangement, Hannah noticed small changes in their interactions. Nathaniel lingering longer at breakfast, occasional glances held a moment too long, conversations that ventured beyond mere practicalities into shared observations about books they'd read or places they'd seen. That evening after dinner, Hannah worked on mending a shirt of Nathaniel's that had torn at the elbow. The domestic task felt strangely intimate, caring for the clothing of a man who was her husband in name only. The next time they visited Wilson's general store, Charlotte greeted Hannah differently, with a small nod that contained more warmth than any effusive welcome. "Heard what you did for the Ramirez boy," she said quietly, as she wrapped Hannah's purchases in brown paper. "This town could use more folks willing to look past appearances." She slid a small packet across the counter, seeds for hardy western wildflowers. "For your garden when you plant one. Survived my first hard winter here. They'll do the same for you." The simple gift, practical yet thoughtful, told Hannah more about Charlotte Wilson than a dozen conversations could have. The shopkeeper understood transplanting and taking root in foreign soil, understood it intimately. "Thank you," Hannah said, tucking the seeds into her basket. Charlotte nodded, her usual briskness returning. "Mind you plant them before the first frost," was all she said, but the connection had been forged. Another fragile tendril of belonging in this new place Hannah was cautiously beginning to call home. Nathaniel sat nearby, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. "Sheriff Cooper suggested I keep this close at hand for a while," he explained, catching her glance. "Just as a precaution." Hannah nodded, returning to her stitching. After a moment, she said, "In Boston, after the war, there was a family on our street, German immigrants. Someone broke their windows one night, painted cruel words on their door." She pulled the thread through with perhaps more force than necessary. "My father went and sat on their porch every night for a week with his old service revolver. The vandals never came back." Nathaniel looked at her with new interest. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was," Hannah agreed softly. "He believed that standing with people who are being wronged is not a choice, but an obligation." "And your mother?" Hannah smiled beneath her veil at the memory. "She brought the family a different casserole every day for that same week. She said fighting injustice required both courage and proper feeding." Nathaniel chuckled, a warm, rusty sound, as if unused. "Wise woman." "Yes," Hannah agreed, feeling a pang of homesickness. She was. Well, they lapsed into silence again, but it felt different now, companionable rather than strained. Hannah realized that they had just shared their first real conversation, had glimpsed aspects of each other beyond the careful facades they maintained. Later, as she prepared for bed, Hannah found herself thinking about Nathaniel in a new light. He was still a mystery in many ways, still connected to her brother's death by threads she couldn't yet unravel. But he was also a man who had stood up for the Ramirez family when it would have been easier to look away, who respected her knowledge without questioning how she had acquired it, who kept his distance not out of coldness, but out of consideration. As dawn broke on what would be their 100th day together, Hannah gazed eastward from the mission window, thinking how completely her life had transformed in the span of a season. The woman who had arrived in autumn, veiled and guarded, it barely resembled the one who now prepared to ride back through the winter landscape to find Nathaniel, a man who had somehow become essential to her in ways she hadn't thought possible. She touched the edge of her veil, contemplating its weight against her skin. How long had it been since she had allowed anyone to see her face? Since she had allowed herself to be truly seen? The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. The next day dawned clear and crisp. Hannah had just finished hanging laundry to dry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Shielding her eyes against the sun, she saw Sheriff Cooper riding hard toward the house. Nathaniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Thomas, what is it?" Cooper reined in his horse, dust swirling around its hooves. "Trouble at the Ramirez place," he said grimly. "Blackwood and his men are there now, claiming Gabriel's stallion broke through the fence and trampled Blackwood's crops. They're demanding compensation or they'll take the horse." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "That stallion hasn't left Gabriel's corral in a week. I helped him reinforce the gate myself." "I know that, and you know that," Cooper said. "But Blackwood's got 2 witnesses saying otherwise." He glanced at Hannah. "Sorry, ma'am, but this could get ugly." Nathaniel turned to Hannah. "You should stay here." Hannah straightened her spine. "I will not," she said firmly. "If Sophia and Daniel are there, they might need help." Nathaniel looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment, he simply nodded. "Stay close to me, he said, then turned to saddle the horses. They arrived at the Ramirez ranch to find a tense standoff in progress. Ezra Blackwood and 2 men, presumably Pike and Dawson, sat on horseback facing Gabriel, who stood protectively in front of his corral gate. Sophia and Daniel watched from the porch, fear evident in their postures. Blackwood turned as they approached, a cold smile spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't Dr. Hayes coming to the rescue, and Mrs. Hayes too, how delightful. Nathaniel dismounted, helping Hannah down before addressing Blackwood. What's this about, Ezra? Simple matter of property damage, Blackwood replied smoothly. Ramirez's stallion broke loose, trampled my new wheat field. I'm due compensation. My horse never left this corral, Gabriel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. The gate has been secured with new chains all week. My men saw differently, Blackwood countered, gesturing to Pike and Dawson, who nodded on cue. 2 against 1, I'm afraid. For a moment, something flickered in Blackwood's eyes as he glanced at Daniel, a flash of unexpected emotion quickly suppressed. His gaze lingered on the boy's scarred face, and his hand drifted unconsciously to his own scar. There was a curious stillness in his posture, as though 2 warring parts of himself were momentarily at stalemate, the ruthless railroad man and something else, something buried so deep it rarely surfaced. Then Pike shifted impatiently beside him, and the moment passed, Blackwood's expression settling back into cold determination. Sheriff Cooper dismounted as well, positioning himself between the parties. Now, Ezra, you know as well as I do that— That what, Sheriff? Blackwood interrupted. That the law applies differently to some folks than others? His gaze shifted to Hannah. Strange times we live in. A man who couldn't hold a scalpel steady suddenly playing protector. A woman hiding her face teaching a Mexican boy his letters. He leaned forward in his saddle. Makes a man curious about what else might be hidden around here. Hannah felt a chill run through her at his words, at the way his eyes seemed to bore through her veil. There was something in his manner that went beyond the ordinary bullying of a land-hungry railroad man, something personal and targeted. Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Enough, Ezra. This has nothing to do with my wife. Your quarrel is with me. Is it? Blackwood's gaze remained fixed on Hannah. I wonder. Blackwood, Sheriff Cooper cut in sharply, either file a formal complaint about the horse or clear off Ramirez's land. This intimidation stops now. For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwood might escalate the confrontation. Then he straightened in his saddle, his expression smoothing into false civility. No need for a formal complaint just yet. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. He looked pointedly at Gabriel. Think about selling, Ramirez. Things happen to stubborn folks out here. Bad things. With that, he wheeled his horse around, Pike and Dawson following. As they rode past Hannah, Blackwood tipped his hat. Mrs. Hayes, he said, drawing out the name as if tasting it. Or should I say, Nurse Sullivan. Hannah froze, her blood turning to ice. How could he possibly know? Blackwood's smile widened at her reaction. Thought so, he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear, then spurred his horse forward, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The aftermath of Blackwood's visit left everyone shaken. Gabriel immediately set to checking his fences and horses, while Sophia brought coffee to the porch where the others gathered. Daniel hovered near Hannah, his young face serious beneath his hat. How did he know your maiden name? Cooper asked Hannah directly, his shrewd eyes studying her. Hannah's mind raced. Should she reveal this truth? Part of it? She glanced at Nathaniel, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. I was a nurse during the war, she admitted finally. Blackwood must have heard of me from someone in the regiment. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Cooper nodded slowly. And the veil? Hannah's hand moved instinctively to her covered face. A reminder of that time, she said carefully. To his credit, Cooper didn't press further. Blackwood's digging for something, he said instead, turning to Nathaniel. This goes beyond the railroad wanting Ramirez's land. I know, Nathaniel replied grimly. Gabriel rejoined them, wiping sweat from his brow. All horses accounted for, all fences intact. His claim is a lie. Of course it is, Cooper agreed, but he's building a case, gathering witnesses. Legal or not, it puts pressure on you. Sophia, who had been silent until now, spoke up. This is not the first time someone has tried to drive us from our home. Her eyes met her husband's. We did not run then. We will not run now. Hannah was struck by the quiet strength in the woman's voice, the determination. She wondered what tragedy lay in their past. What had forged this resolve? As if reading her thoughts, Daniel moved closer to Hannah, speaking softly. Our house in Mexico was burned, he said simply. Men came at night. They said the land wasn't ours anymore. Sophia made a small sound of distress, but didn't silence her son. I was trapped, Daniel continued, his hand unconsciously moving to his scarred cheek. Papa tried to reach me, but the roof fell. There was a man who watched it burn. He had a scar like this. He drew a line with his finger from his eyebrow down his cheek, exactly matching Blackwood's distinctive scar. A heavy silence fell over the porch. Hannah looked from Daniel to Gabriel and Sophia, understanding dawning. Blackwood? She whispered. He was there when your home burned in Mexico? Gabriel nodded slowly. I didn't make the connection at first. It was dark that night, and many years have passed. But when I saw him watch Daniel yesterday, the way he reacted to my son's face, his hands clenched into fists. There is no mistake. It was him. He worked for the rail company in Texas before coming here, Cooper said thoughtfully. They were expanding lines into Mexico around that time. And now he's seen the only witness who could identify him, Nathaniel concluded, the implications clear in his grim expression. Hannah felt a surge of protective fury. Daniel was just a child, innocent and vulnerable. That Blackwood would threaten him, would try to silence him permanently. The thought was unbearable. What can we do? She asked. Cooper sighed heavily. Without proof, my hands are tied, legally speaking, but I'll keep a close watch on Blackwood's movements. He turned to Gabriel. In the meantime, it might be wise for your family to stay somewhere else for a few days. Gabriel began to protest, but Sophia laid a hand on his arm. For Daniel, she said softly, and Gabriel's resistance crumbled. You'll stay with us, Hannah said without hesitation. Our home is your home for as long as needed. Nathaniel nodded in agreement. Cooper's right. It's not safe here until we figure out what Blackwood is planning. As they helped the Ramirez family gather essential belongings, Hannah noticed Nathaniel watching her. When their eyes met, she saw something new in his gaze. Respect, certainly, but something more. A warming, perhaps, of the careful distance he had maintained since her arrival. The winter solstice approached, marking nearly 3 months since Hannah had stepped off the stagecoach into her new life. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had evolved day by day into something neither of them had anticipated. Something that felt increasingly like home despite the danger now threatening their fragile peace. That was kind, he said quietly as they loaded blankets into the wagon. Offering our home. Hannah adjusted her veil, suddenly self-conscious. It's what my parents would have done, she replied simply. Nathaniel studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once. It's what good people do, he agreed. In that moment, despite the danger looming over them all, Hannah felt a curious sense of rightness. For the first time since the war, she was using her skills openly, standing up for others who needed protection. She was being not just Hannah Sullivan, the veiled woman, nor Hannah Hayes, the mail-order bride, but something closer to her true self, the person she had been before fire and grief had reshaped her life. And Nathaniel, it seemed, approved of this person. The realization brought a warmth to her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. That evening, the Hayes home was fuller than it had ever been. Sophia prepared dinner, while Gabriel helped Nathaniel secure the property, boarding up unused windows and checking sight lines from the house to the surrounding land. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, watching Hannah prepare medicinal supplies. Are we in danger? He asked quietly, his young face solemn beneath his ever-present hat. Hannah considered how to answer. She had never believed in lying to children about serious matters. There is some risk, she acknowledged, measuring herbs into a small cloth bag. But Sheriff Cooper is watching over us, and Mr. Hayes knows how to protect his home. Daniel nodded, digesting this. Because of the war? Papa says Mr. Hayes was a doctor then. Yes, Hannah said carefully. He helped many soldiers. Daniel studied her for a moment. Were you there too, in the war? Hannah's hand stilled. What makes you ask that? The way you know about medicines, the way you don't look away from my face like other people do. Daniel's directness was disarming. And that man, Blackwood, he called you Nurse Sullivan. Clever boy, Hannah thought. Too observant by half. Yes, she admitted. I was a nurse during the war. Daniel considered this, then asked the question Hannah had been dreading. Is that why you wear the veil? Because of something that happened there? Hannah's throat tightened. How to explain to a child what she could barely acknowledge to herself? The loss, the pain, the shame that had driven her to hide? Yes, she said simply, unable to elaborate further. Daniel seemed to accept this limited answer. After a moment, he said, I used to hide my face all the time. I still do, mostly. But you told me I was brave for showing you. He paused, then added with a child's perfect logic, maybe you could be brave too. Hannah felt as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Before she could respond, Sophia called Daniel to help set the table. As the boy moved away, Hannah remained frozen, his words echoing in her mind. Maybe you could be brave too. Was it really that simple? No, of course not. And yet, there was a certain clarity in Daniel's perspective, unclouded by the complexities adults layered onto their wounds and fears. Hannah touched her veil lightly, feeling the familiar fabric against her fingertips. She had worn it for so long now that it felt like a part of her. The thought of removing it, of exposing her scarred face to the world, to Nathaniel, sent a wave of anxiety through her. And yet, wasn't that exactly what she had encouraged Daniel to do? To show his scars, to stand tall despite them? Her thoughts were interrupted by the men returning from their security check. Nathaniel entered first, his expression grim but composed. Everything's as secure as we can make it, he reported. Gabriel and I will take watches through the night. Dinner was a subdued affair, everyone aware of the threat hanging over them. Afterwards, as Sophia settled Daniel in the small spare room, Hannah prepared coffee for the men's night watch. She brought a cup to Nathaniel, who sat on the porch, rifle across his knees. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their eerie cries floating on the cool air. Thank you, Nathaniel said, accepting the coffee. As Hannah turned to go, he added, will you sit for a moment? Surprised, Hannah settled beside him on the porch step, careful to maintain a proper distance. They sat in silence for a while, the vastness of the night sky stretching above them. What Blackwood said today, Nathaniel began, his voice low, about your being a nurse. Hannah tensed. Yes? I wanted to say, I understand why you didn't tell me. He stared into his coffee, not looking at her. We all have parts of the war we'd rather forget. Hannah felt a rush of relief, followed immediately by guilt. He thought that was the extent of her secret, that she had been a nurse. He didn't know about William, about her connection to his past. Thank you, she said softly, the words wholly inadequate. Nathaniel looked at her then, his expression softened by the moonlight. You're good with Daniel, he observed. He trusts you. Children often see more clearly than adults, Hannah replied. They recognize kindness without questioning motives. And they ask the questions adults are too polite to voice, Nathaniel added with a hint of humor. Hannah couldn't help but smile beneath her veil. Indeed. Another silence fell between them, but it was comfortable now, almost companionable. Hannah found herself studying Nathaniel's profile in the moonlight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows that never quite disappeared, the way his eyes seemed to take in everything at once, alert to any danger that might threaten those in his care. You would have made a good father, she said without thinking. Nathaniel looked at her, startled by the personal nature of the observation. Thank you, he said finally, though I've never much considered it. No, Hannah asked, curious despite herself. Nathaniel shrugged, a small, tight movement. After the war, I didn't think I deserved such ordinary happiness. He paused, then added so quietly she almost didn't hear. Still don't most days. The raw honesty of his admission caught Hannah off guard. For the first time, she glimpsed the depth of his self-recrimination, the burden he carried. Whatever had happened during the war, whatever had happened with William, Nathaniel Hayes had judged himself harshly for it. Before she could respond, a sound from inside the house drew their attention. Gabriel appeared in the doorway. My turn for watch, he said quietly. Nathaniel nodded and stood, handing Gabriel the rifle. Wake me in 4 hours. As they moved to enter the house, a flicker of movement at the edge of the property caught Hannah's eye. She paused, peering into the darkness. What is it? Nathaniel asked, immediately alert. I thought I saw something by the big oak, Hannah replied, pointing toward a shadowy tree about 100 yards from the house. Nathaniel and Gabriel both scanned the darkness. After a moment, Gabriel shook his head. I see nothing. Perhaps an animal? Perhaps, Hannah agreed, but an uneasy feeling had settled in her stomach. As she followed Nathaniel inside, she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, of hostile eyes tracking their movements from the sheltering darkness. That night, despite her exhaustion, Hannah slept fitfully, her dreams filled with fire and faceless men with scars like Blackwoods. In the deepest hours of the night, she woke suddenly, certain she had heard something, a crack, like a branch breaking under a heavy foot. She lay still, listening intently, but heard only the normal sounds of the house settling, the distant howl of coyotes, and the soft murmur of voices as Nathaniel took his turn at watch. Eventually, she drifted back to sleep, one hand resting near the drawer where she had stored the small revolver her father had insisted she take when she left Boston. A precaution, he had called it, for a woman traveling alone to a new territory. Hannah had never fired it, had hoped never to need it. But as darkness pressed against the windows and danger lurked at the edges of their property, she found herself grateful for its solid presence, for this small connection to her father's protective instincts. Standing with people who are being wronged is not a choice, but an obligation, he had taught her. Tomorrow she would stand with the Ramirez family, with Daniel, with Nathaniel. Whatever secrets lay between them, whatever past connections threatened to surface, they were bound together now by something stronger, the simple human duty to protect one another from harm. With that resolution firming in her mind, Hannah finally surrendered to sleep, unaware that the coming day would test that resolve in ways she could not possibly imagine. Dawn broke with an unnatural stillness. No birdsong greeted the first light, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, just a heavy silence that pressed against the windows like a physical thing. Hannah woke immediately alert, senses honed by years in field hospitals where danger could arrive without warning. Something was wrong. She dressed quickly, securing her veil before making her way to the kitchen. Sophia was already there, moving quietly as she prepared coffee. Their eyes met in wordless understanding. Both women had lived through enough to recognize the tension in the air. The men? Hannah asked softly. Gabriel is watching the north side. Nathaniel went to check the horses. Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel is still sleeping. Hannah moved to the window, carefully positioning herself to one side as she peered out. The yard appeared empty, bathed in the pale gold of early morning, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up nonetheless. Something's not right, she murmured, more to herself than to Sophia. As if summoned by her words, Nathaniel appeared from the direction of the barn, moving with purposeful strides toward the house. His expression, even at a distance, was grim. Hannah met him at the door. What is it? She asked, searching his face. Tracks, he said tersely. Fresh ones all around the property. At least 3 men, circling the house during the night. Sophia's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. Blackwood? Hannah asked, though she already knew the answer. Nathaniel nodded. Most likely, they're watching us, waiting for something. He glanced at Sophia. Where's Gabriel? North side, Sophia answered, moving toward the hallway. I'll get Daniel. As Sophia disappeared to wake her son, Nathaniel turned to Hannah, his expression softening fractionally. Are you all right? The question surprised her. His first concern, even now, was for her well-being. Yes, she answered. What can I do? Nathaniel seemed to appreciate her practical response. Keep everyone inside, away from the windows. I'll find Gabriel and... A single gunshot cracked through the morning silence, followed immediately by the sound of breaking glass from the north side of the house. Gabriel! Sophia's scream came from the hallway, followed by her running footsteps. Nathaniel moved with shocking speed, intercepting Sophia before she could reach the front door. Stay inside, he ordered, then turned to Hannah. My rifle is by the back door. Get it and watch the south approach. I'm going to find Gabriel. Before Hannah could protest, he was gone, slipping out the door with the fluid movements of a man who had navigated danger before. Sophia stood frozen, her face a mask of fear. From the hallway came Daniel's frightened voice calling for his mother. The sound galvanized Hannah into action. Sophia, take Daniel to the root cellar, she instructed firmly. Stay there until one of us comes for you. Sophia hesitated only briefly before nodding and hurrying to her son. Hannah moved quickly to retrieve Nathaniel's rifle, checking that it was loaded before positioning herself at the south-facing window. Her hands were steady as she scanned the property, years of medical training under fire returning to her in an instant. Outside, she could see Nathaniel crouched low, moving along the side of the house toward where Gabriel had been stationed. The property remained eerily still, no sign of attackers visible from her vantage point. Long minutes passed. Hannah divided her attention between watching for threats and listening for any sound from Nathaniel or Gabriel. When the back door finally creaked open, she whirled, rifle raised, only to lower it immediately at the sight of Nathaniel supporting a bleeding Gabriel. "Help me get him to the table," Nathaniel grunted, half carrying the other man. Hannah rushed to assist, setting aside the rifle to help ease Gabriel onto the kitchen table. Blood soaked the left shoulder of his shirt, his face pale with shock and pain. "Bullet grazed him," Nathaniel explained tersely. "Missed anything vital, but he's lost blood." Hannah was already moving, gathering clean cloths and the medical supplies she had prepared the night before. "Sophia and Daniel?" she asked as she cut away Gabriel's bloodied shirt. "In the root cellar," Nathaniel confirmed, washing his hands thoroughly in the basin, "where they need to stay for now." Hannah nodded, her focus narrowing to the wound before her. Gabriel's eyes fluttered open as she pressed a clean cloth to his shoulder. "Shooter? In the trees," he managed, his voice strained. "Never saw him." "Don't talk now," Hannah soothed, working alongside Nathaniel with practiced efficiency. They moved in concert, hardly needing to speak as they cleaned and treated the wound, a synchronized dance they had perfected in very different circumstances, with very different patients. It was only when the wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged that Hannah allowed herself to fully realize how seamlessly they had worked together, how naturally they had fallen into roles they had once inhabited in field hospitals, far from this place. Nathaniel's hands had been perfectly steady throughout, his movements precise and sure. His eyes met hers over Gabriel's now sleeping form, and she knew he had realized it too. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that the past they both tried to escape had forged in them skills that could heal as well as harm. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Nathaniel moved to the window, positioning himself carefully to one side. Cooper, he identified, some of the tension leaving his shoulders, and two others from town. Minutes later, Sheriff Cooper strode through the door, his weathered face tight with concern. Behind him followed two men Hannah recognized vaguely from town, one the blacksmith, the other a rancher from the Eastern Valley. "Damn it all to hell," Cooper swore, taking in Gabriel's bandaged form on the table. "We were too late." "You knew this was coming?" Nathaniel demanded, an edge to his voice. Cooper removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. "Got word just before dawn. One of the saloon girls overheard Blackwood and his men planning something for this morning. Said they were drinking heavy and talking about settling scores and eliminating witnesses." His gaze moved to Gabriel. "How bad?" "He'll live," Hannah answered, her professional assessment automatic. "The bullet only grazed him." "Thank God for small mercies," Cooper murmured, a shadow crossing his weathered face. Hannah noticed a slight tremor in his hand as he replaced his hat, the kind of involuntary response that spoke of old memories stirred fresh. Nathaniel caught it too. "Thomas?" he said quietly, "you all right?" Cooper straightened his shoulders, composure returning. "Just ghosts, Nathaniel. Same war, different battlefields." He glanced at Hannah, something knowing in his gaze. "Lost my brother at Fredericksburg. Artillery fire. Medical tent never stood a chance." The quiet admission hung in the air, a connection Hannah hadn't anticipated. Cooper wasn't just a lawman upholding justice. He was another soul carrying war wounds invisible to the eye. "I'm sorry, Mother," Hannah said softly. Cooper nodded once, acknowledgement and dismissal in the same gesture. He turned back to business, voice firming. "Blackwood's been busy. They weren't aiming to kill," Nathaniel said grimly. "Not yet. This was a warning shot." "Or a provocation," Cooper suggested, trying to draw us out into the open. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Makes sense. There are still men out there watching the property." "My men are circling around to flank them," Cooper assured him. "We'll flush them out." Hannah glanced toward the door that led to the root cellar. "Sophia and Daniel are hidden. They should stay there until this is over." Cooper's expression darkened further. It won't be over that easily, I'm afraid. Blackwood's been busy. He filed formal charges against Gabriel this morning. Claims he has proof the Ramirez family is squatting illegally on railroad land. That's absurd, Nathaniel protested. Gabriel has proper deeds. I helped him file them myself. Blackwood claims they're forgeries, Cooper replied. He's pushing for immediate eviction. Hannah felt cold anger rise within her. This is about Daniel, she said with certainty. Blackwood fears what he might remember, what he might tell. Cooper looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Quickly, Hannah related what Daniel had told them about recognizing Blackwood from the fire in Mexico. Cooper listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each word. If that's true, he said slowly, then this goes well beyond a land dispute. That's murder Blackwood would be guilty of. Daniel is the only witness, Hannah concluded, and Blackwood wants to silence him permanently. The implications hung heavy in the room. If Blackwood succeeded in forcing the Ramirez family off their land, there would be nothing to stop him from arranging a fatal accident during their relocation. We need proof, Cooper said at last, something that ties Blackwood to the fire in Mexico. And in the meantime, Nathaniel asked, his hand resting protectively on the rifle he had reclaimed. Cooper's answer was interrupted by shouts from outside, followed by a burst of gunfire. Everyone dropped instinctively. Hannah pulling Gabriel's unconscious form partially off the table to shield him, Nathaniel moving to cover her, Cooper and his men drawing weapons as they flattened against walls. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Cautiously, Cooper peered out the window. Looks like my men found one of Blackwood's watchers, he reported. They're bringing him in. Indeed, moments later, two deputies appeared, frog-marching a sullen-faced man with a bloody gash on his forehead. Hannah recognized him as one of the men who had accompanied Blackwood to the Ramirez ranch. Pike, if she remembered correctly. They brought him into the house, shoving him roughly into a chair. Pike glared at them all, saying nothing. Found him hiding in the stand of pines to the west, one deputy reported. Fired on us when we approached. Cooper stood before the captive, his stance authoritative. You're in a world of trouble, Pike. Firing on a lawman carries a hefty sentence in this territory. Pike spat on the floor. Didn't know it was the law. Thought it was more Mexicans. And that would make it better? Cooper asked coldly. Where's Blackwood now? Pike's eyes narrowed. Don't know what you're talking about. Cooper sighed as if disappointed. Have it your way. He turned to his deputies. Take him to town. Lock him up good and tight. As they hauled Pike to his feet, Hannah stepped forward. Wait. She approached the prisoner, studying him with clinical detachment. You were in Texas before this, weren't you? Working for the railroad there too? Something flickered in Pike's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. You were with Blackwood in Mexico, she continued steadily, when he burned out the Ramirez family and others like them. Pike's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about, lady. Don't I? Hannah took a calculated risk. Daniel Ramirez recognized Blackwood. How long before he recognizes you too? Pike's composure cracked slightly. The kid was supposed to be dead, he muttered, then seemed to realize what he'd admitted. His eyes widened in alarm. Take him away, Cooper ordered, satisfaction evident in his voice. And write down exactly what he just said. As the deputies removed the prisoner, Cooper turned to Nathaniel and Hannah. It's not much, but it's a start. Pike just confirmed Blackwood's connection to the fire and his knowledge that Daniel was meant to die in it. Will it be enough? Hannah asked. Cooper's hesitation was answer enough. We need more. Pike's word against Blackwood's won't get us far, especially with Blackwood's connections to the railroad. Nathaniel moved to check on Gabriel, who was beginning to stir. We need to get Sophia and Daniel somewhere safer, he said. Blackwood will be desperate once he learns Pike is in custody. My ranch is too far, Cooper mused, and the town jail is the first place he'd look. What about the old mission, Nathaniel suggested. It's abandoned, but the walls are solid, and it's the last place Blackwood would think to search. Cooper considered this, then nodded. Good thinking. I'll have my men secure it, then come back with a wagon after dark. He donned his hat. In the meantime, stay vigilant. Blackwood's still out there, and he's not the type to give up easily. After Cooper left, Hannah retrieved Sophia and Daniel from the root cellar. Sophia rushed immediately to Gabriel's side, tears flowing freely as she saw his injury. Daniel hung back, his young face solemn beneath the ever-present hat, eyes wide with fear. Hannah knelt before him. "Your father will be all right," she assured him gently. The bullet only grazed him. Daniel nodded, but his gaze remained troubled. "It's because of me, isn't it?" he asked in a small voice. "Because I saw that man, Blackwood, in Mexico." Hannah hesitated, torn between honesty and the desire to shield him from this burden. "It's because Blackwood is a bad man who does bad things," she said finally. "None of this is your fault, Daniel." The boy looked unconvinced. "If I hadn't said anything, then Blackwood would still be threatening your family, still trying to steal your land," Nathaniel interjected, coming to stand beside Hannah. "Men like him always find excuses for their cruelty." Daniel considered this. "What happens now?" Nathaniel exchanged a glance with Hannah before answering. "Tonight, Sheriff Cooper will move you somewhere safer, somewhere Blackwood won't find you." "And then?" Daniel pressed. "And then we find a way to stop Blackwood for good," Nathaniel replied, his voice firm with resolve. The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance. Gabriel regained consciousness fully, weak but alert. Nathaniel and Hannah took turns watching the approaches to the house, while Sophia prepared supplies for their nighttime journey to the mission. As dusk approached, Hannah found herself alone with Nathaniel on the porch, both scanning the deepening shadows for any sign of movement. "You were a good nurse," Nathaniel said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I saw it in how you treated Gabriel. Steady hands, quick decisions." Hannah felt a flush of pride at the professional compliment. "Thank you. You were a good doctor too." Nathaniel's expression tightened. "Once, perhaps." "Your hands didn't shake today," Hannah observed quietly. He glanced down at his hands, as if surprised to find them steady. "No," he agreed slowly. "They didn't." Hannah hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did they ever? Shake, I mean." For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice low and controlled, he said, "There was a field hospital near Fredericksburg. We were overwhelmed. Too many wounded, too few doctors. I'd been operating for 30 hours straight." He paused, his gaze distant with memory. "A young soldier was brought in, badly burned. Artillery shell. He was—" Nathaniel swallowed hard. "He was barely conscious, in terrible pain, but lucid enough to beg for help." Hannah held her breath, knowing what was coming, dreading it. "I started to operate, but my hands, they just stopped working. Wouldn't stop shaking." Nathaniel's voice had become mechanical, as if distancing himself from the memory. "I couldn't hold the instruments, couldn't do what needed to be done, and he died. Because of me, he died." The weight of unsaid things hung between them. Hannah knew he was speaking of William, her brother, though Nathaniel had no idea of her connection to the story. "War makes victims of everyone it touches," she said softly, "even those trying to heal." Nathaniel looked at her, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Is that what happened to you? Is that why you wear the veil?" Hannah's throat tightened. After he had shared his painful truth, didn't she owe him something of hers? Not all of it. She wasn't ready for that. But perhaps a piece. "There was a fire," she began haltingly, "in a field hospital. I tried to save someone, couldn't. Got this for my trouble." She gestured vaguely toward her veiled face. "After the war, people stared, whispered. In Boston, a veiled war widow raises fewer questions than a scarred spinster." It wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't a lie either, and it was more than she had told anyone since leaving Boston. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. "I've never asked to see," he said quietly. "I won't now, but Hannah—" He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "Whatever lies beneath that veil, it doesn't matter to me. I've seen too many wounds, given too many wounds, to be frightened by scars." The simple sincerity in his words touched something deep within her, a tender place long walled off from hope or connection. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching horses alerted them both to Cooper's return. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. Some barrier lowered, some understanding reached. As they prepared the Ramirez family for transport, Hannah found herself working alongside Nathaniel with a new ease, their movements complementing each other as if they had been partners for years rather than weeks. Cooper had brought a wagon with a false bottom, cleverly designed to hide passengers beneath a layer of hay and farm supplies. Gabriel, still weak from his wound, was helped inside first, followed by the Sophia and Daniel. "The mission is prepared," Cooper informed them in hushed tones. "Food, water, blankets, enough for several days if needed. Two of my most trusted deputies will stand guard." "In Blackwood?" Nathaniel asked. "No sign of him since this morning," Cooper replied grimly. "Which worries me more than if he were making a racket. He's planning something." Hannah knelt beside the wagon to say goodbye to Daniel. The boy looked small and frightened among the blankets, but he met her eyes bravely. "Remember what I told you about the stars?" she asked him softly. "How sailors use them to find their way home." Daniel nodded. "Tonight, when you look up at them, know that I'm looking at the same stars," she continued, "and that we'll see each other again very soon." Daniel reached out suddenly, small fingers brushing against the edge of her veil. "When I see you next," he whispered, "will you be brave?" The innocent question pierced Hannah's heart. Before she could respond, Sophia called softly to her son, and the moment was gone. Cooper secured the false bottom of the wagon, concealing its precious cargo beneath mundane supplies. "Stay alert," he warned Nathaniel and Hannah. "I've left a man watching the north approach, but he can't cover everything." As the wagon pulled away into the gathering darkness, Hannah felt a profound sense of both relief and foreboding. The Ramirez family would be safer at the mission, but she and Nathaniel now stood alone against whatever Blackwood might plan. "We should secure the house," Nathaniel said, breaking into her thoughts. "Bar the doors and windows. It's going to be a long night." They worked in companionable silence, moving through the house methodically. When everything was as secure as they could make it, they settled in the main room, lamps dimmed to avoid creating silhouettes against the windows. "You should try to rest," Nathaniel suggested. "I'll take first watch." Hannah shook her head. "I'm not tired." It wasn't entirely true, but the thought of sleep while danger lurked outside seemed impossible. "Tell me about your life before the war," she requested instead, seeking distraction from their tense circumstances. Nathaniel looked surprised by the personal question, but after a moment he began to speak. He told her of growing up in Pennsylvania, the son of a country doctor who had taught him medicine from boyhood, of his mother's death from fever when he was 12, and how it had shaped his determination to become a healer. Of his early days as a doctor in a small town not unlike Dry Creek, before the war had called him away. In return, Hannah shared carefully selected stories from her own past: her childhood in Boston, her father's work as a professor of literature, her mother's involvement in social reforms. She spoke of William too, though not by name, describing him only as "my brother who had joined the Union Army with idealistic fervor." "He died at Fredericksburg," she said finally, watching Nathaniel's face carefully. A shadow passed over his features. "So many did," he murmured. She wanted to press further, to ask directly about William, but caution held her back. The fragile trust building between them felt too precious to risk. Instead, she steered the conversation to lighter topics: books they had read, places they had seen, small joys they had known before war had reshaped their lives. As they talked, Hannah became aware of a curious warmth growing within her, a sense of connection she had not felt in years. Nathaniel Hayes was no longer simply the stranger she had married, but a person with depth and complexity, with wounds and strengths that echoed her own. The hours passed, the night deepening around them. Eventually, their conversation lapsed into comfortable silence. Nathaniel rose to check the windows, peering cautiously into the darkness. "Still quiet," he reported. "Too quiet, almost." Hannah was about to respond when a faint scent reached her nostrils, acrid, unmistakable. Her body reacted before her mind fully processed it, years of battlefield instinct taking over. "Fire!" she gasped, leaping to her feet. Nathaniel's head snapped toward her. Then he inhaled sharply. "Where?" They moved through the house, checking each room. It was in the back bedroom, Sophia and Daniel's temporary quarters, that they found it, smoke curling beneath the door, the wood already hot to touch. "They've set the back wall ablaze," Nathaniel realized grimly, "trying to smoke us out." Hannah's mind raced. "Can we extinguish it?" "Not from inside," Nathaniel replied, already moving toward the kitchen. "We need to get out before the whole house goes up." Hannah followed, heart pounding. They'll be waiting for us. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, retrieving his rifle and handing Hannah her father's revolver. But we can't stay. The fire will spread quickly in this dry wood. Already the smoke was thickening, making breathing difficult. Hannah tied a dampened cloth over her nose and mouth, beneath her veil. Nathaniel did the same, then led the way to the front door. Stay low, he instructed. When we go out, head for the barn. It's our best chance for cover. Hannah nodded, gripping the revolver tightly. Nathaniel counted down silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Then flung the door open. They burst onto the porch, crouching low. The night air was blessedly clear after the smoky interior, but Hannah had no time to appreciate it. Gunfire erupted from the darkness, bullets splintering the wood around them. Nathaniel returned fire, providing cover as they made a dash for the barn. Hannah ran as she had never run before, expecting at any moment to feel the burning bite of a bullet, but they reached the barn unscathed, slipping inside its shadowy interior. How many? She gasped, trying to catch her breath. At least 3, maybe 4, Nathaniel replied, peering through a crack in the wall, spread out in a semicircle between us and the road. Behind them, the house was now fully engulfed, flames shooting skyward in a terrible, beautiful display. The light it cast created long shadows that danced across the yard, making it difficult to distinguish human movement from the play of light and dark. We're trapped, Hannah realized. They've positioned themselves to cut off any escape. Nathaniel's expression was grim but determined. Not quite. He moved deeper into the barn, toward where the horses were stabled. There's a back way out, a small door I use when checking the south pasture. It's not visible from the main approach. Hope flared in Hannah's chest. We could ride for the mission. Warn the others. That's what I'm thinking, Nathaniel agreed, already saddling his most reliable mare. But someone needs to distract Blackwood and his men while the other slips away. Understanding dawned on Hannah. You want me to go while you stay behind? You're smaller, lighter, the horse will move faster with you, Nathaniel argued, and you know where the mission is. So do you, Hannah countered, and you're the better shot. They stared at each other in the flickering light cast by the burning house, neither willing to leave the other behind. The impasse was broken by a shout from outside. Hayes, Blackwood's voice carried clearly, come out and face me, you coward. Or do you hide behind women's skirts now, as well as medical excuses? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He's trying to goad me into the open. Don't give him what he wants, Hannah urged. Another shout. I know she's in there with you, Hayes. Your veiled bride, or should I say, Nurse Sullivan, sister of the soldier you let die. Hannah froze, ice flooding her veins. How could Blackwood possibly know? Nathaniel turned to her slowly, confusion evident in his expression. What is he talking about? There was no time for explanations, no opportunity to soften the blow. William Sullivan was my brother, Hannah said simply, the burned soldier at Fredericksburg, the one you couldn't save. Nathaniel staggered back as if physically struck. Your brother? He whispered hoarsely. All this time, you knew? I only realized when I found the photograph in your journal, Hannah admitted. I didn't know how to tell you. Betrayal and hurt flashed across Nathaniel's face, followed quickly by understanding. That's why you agreed to marry me? To confront me about William? No, Hannah protested. I had no idea you were connected to William when we corresponded. It was only after I arrived. Their conversation was cut short by the crash of something heavy against the barn door. Blackwood's men were trying to break in. This isn't over, Nathaniel said, his voice tight. But right now, we need to survive. He turned back to the horse, completing the saddling with swift, practiced movements. You need to go. Now, take the South Trail to the mission. Warren Cooper. Hannah hesitated. After what she had just revealed, how could she leave him? Nathaniel, go, Hannah, he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Please. The plea in his voice decided her. She mounted the horse, leaning down to accept the rifle Nathaniel handed up to her. Be careful, she whispered. Nathaniel's hand lingered on hers for a moment. You too. The small rear door opened onto darkness. Hannah urged the horse forward, keeping low across his neck as they emerged into the night. Behind her, she heard a crash as the main barn door finally gave way, followed by shouts and gunfire. She wanted desperately to turn back, to stand with Nathaniel against Blackwood and his men. But the mission was defenseless with only 2 deputies guarding the wounded Gabriel and his family. If Blackwood's goal was to eliminate Daniel as a witness, he wouldn't stop with burning the Hayes Ranch. So she rode, heart pounding in rhythm with the horse's hooves, praying that Nathaniel would survive long enough for her to return with help. The cold night air stung her eyes, causing tears to flow beneath her veil. Or perhaps it was not the air at all, but the fear of losing yet another person she had come to care for. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She cared for Nathaniel Hayes. Despite their initial wariness, despite the shadow of William between them, despite everything, she had come to respect him, to admire him, perhaps even to love him. And she might never have the chance to tell him. The mission appeared ahead, its adobe walls pale in the moonlight. Hannah approached cautiously, alert for any sign that Blackwood had men positioned here as well. But all seemed quiet. She dismounted at the small side door, knocking in the pattern Cooper had taught them. 3 quick raps, followed by 2 slower ones. The door opened a crack, revealing the wary face of Deputy Morris. "Mrs. Hayes?" he exclaimed, opening the door wider. "What's happened?" "Blackwood attacked the ranch," she explained breathlessly, stepping inside. "Set fire to the house. Nathaniel stayed behind to hold them off while I came to warn you." Morris's face hardened. "How many men with Blackwood?" "At least 4 that we saw," Hannah replied. "Where's Cooper?" "Rode into town 2 hours ago," Morris informed her grimly. "Got word that Blackwood was planning something. Guess we know what it was now." "We have to help Nathaniel," Hannah insisted. "He can't hold them off alone for long." Morris hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to guard the Ramirez family and the need to assist Nathaniel. "I can't leave Jenkins here alone," he said finally. "But I can ride to town, bring back Cooper and more men." Hannah shook her head. "That will take too long. I'm going back." "Mrs. Hayes, that's suicide," Morris protested. "You'd be riding right into a firefight." "Then give me more ammunition," Hannah replied, her voice steady with resolve. "And your shotgun." Something in her demeanor must have convinced him of her determination, for after a moment's hesitation, Morris handed over his shotgun and ammunition pouch. "At least wait for first light," he urged. "You'll be an easy target in the dark." Hannah knew he was right, but the thought of Nathaniel facing Blackwood alone through the night was unbearable. "I'll wait until gray dawn," she conceded reluctantly. "But no later. And you'll ride for Cooper now?" Morris nodded. "I'll be back with help as fast as I can." As Morris prepared to leave, Hannah checked on the Ramirez family. Gabriel was awake but weak, his face drawn with pain. Sophia sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes red-rimmed with tears and worry. Daniel was curled on a makeshift pallet nearby, sleeping fitfully. Sophia looked up as Hannah approached. "Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Holding them off," Hannah replied, not wanting to worry her further. "Help is coming." Sophia studied her for a long moment. "You're going back to him," she said. It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded. Sophia reached out, clasping Hannah's hand. "Be careful, mi amiga, and bring him home safe." The simple declaration of friendship, the unquestioning acceptance of her decision to return to danger, it touched Hannah deeply. She squeezed Sophia's hand in silent promise, then moved away to prepare for what lay ahead. The hours until dawn stretched endlessly. Hannah paced, checked and rechecked her weapons, and fought against the images her mind conjured of what might be happening at the ranch. When the first pale light of dawn finally illuminated the eastern sky, she was already mounted and ready. Deputy Jenkins gave her final directions to a back trail that would allow her to approach the ranch from the west, potentially avoiding Blackwood's men if they were still focused on the main approach. With a silent prayer, Hannah set off, the mission falling away behind her as she rode toward uncertainty and danger. The landscape was transformed in the gray half-light of early morning, familiar shapes rendered strange and ghostly. Hannah kept the horse at a steady pace, wary of stumbling in the uncertain visibility. Her mind raced ahead to the ranch, to Nathaniel. Was he still alive? Had he managed to evade Blackwood? Or had her revelation about William distracted him at a critical moment, costing him his life? The thought was unbearable. She had to find him, had to explain, not just about William, but about everything, about how her initial suspicion had given way to understanding, how her fear had transformed into something deeper and more profound. As she neared the ranch, Hannah slowed the horse to a walk, alert for any sign of Blackwood's men. The acrid smell of smoke guided her before the ranch itself came into view. A smoldering ruin where the house had stood, the barn partially collapsed on one side. Of Nathaniel or Blackwood, there was no immediate sign. Hannah dismounted at the edge of the property, securing the horse to a sturdy pine. Moving cautiously, rifle ready, she approached the ruins. The only sounds were the soft crackle of dying embers and the eerie creak of cooling timber. "Nathaniel?" she called softly, scanning the area for any movement. No answer came. Hannah moved closer to the barn, which appeared to have sustained less damage than the house. Its door hung askew on broken hinges, revealing a shadowy interior. She was about to step inside when a voice behind her said, "Hello, Nurse Sullivan." Hannah whirled, rifle raised, to find Ezra Blackwood standing a few yards away, his own weapon trained steadily on her. Blood stained one sleeve of his coat, but his grip was firm and his eyes coldly triumphant. "Where is he?" Hannah demanded, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear gripping her heart. Blackwood's smile was cruel. "Hayes? Oh, he's around somewhere." He gestured vaguely toward the barn with his free hand. "Didn't put up much of a fight in the end." Hands started shaking something terrible once the shooting started in earnest. Hannah refused to believe it. "You're lying." "Am I?" Blackwood took a step closer. "Tell me, did he confess his cowardice to you? Did he tell you how your brother begged for help while Hayes stood there useless?" Another step. "Did he tell you he was the only doctor who survived that night? That everyone else died trying to save their patients while he ran?" Each word was a knife twisting in Hannah's heart. But something didn't ring true. The Nathaniel she had come to know was many things, but a coward was not one of them. "If you killed him," she said quietly, "then just say so." Blackwood's smile widened. "Oh, I didn't say he was dead, not yet anyway." He gestured with his gun toward the ground. "Drop the rifle, Nurse Sullivan. Then we can discuss your husband's fate." Hannah hesitated, weighing her options. If Nathaniel was still alive, surrendering might buy time for Cooper to arrive with help. But trusting Blackwood was a dangerous gamble. Before she could decide, a movement caught her eye, a shadow shifting within the barn, barely perceptible in the dim light. Hope flared within her. Could it be Nathaniel? She needed to keep Blackwood talking, keep his attention focused on her. "Why do you hate him so much?" she asked, lowering her rifle slightly, but not dropping it. "What did Nathaniel do to you?" Blackwood's expression darkened. "He left us to die," he spat. "The coward doctor who couldn't hold a scalpel when it mattered, who ran while better men burned." His voice rose with each word, old rage clearly still fresh. "I survived that night with this." He gestured to the scar on his face, a reminder of what happens when men like Hayes fail in their duty. As he spoke, Hannah saw the shadow in the barn move again, more distinctly this time. A figure was positioning itself near the doorway, just out of Blackwood's line of sight. "And the Ramirez family?" Hannah pressed, desperate to keep Blackwood's attention. "What duty justified burning their home in Mexico, killing innocent people?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Business," he replied coldly. "Just business. The rail line needed that land. They refused to sell. Examples had to be made." He shrugged. "Nothing personal." "It was very personal to Daniel," Hannah countered, her own anger rising. "To a child who watched his home burn, who carries the scars of your business on his face." "Unfortunate collateral damage," Blackwood dismissed. "The boy wasn't supposed to survive. An oversight I intend to correct." "I won't let you harm him," Hannah declared, raising the rifle again. Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're hardly in a position to stop me, Nurse Sullivan." "Perhaps not alone," came Nathaniel's voice from the barn doorway. "But she's not alone." Blackwood whirled, but too late. Nathaniel stood in the open doorway, his own rifle trained unwaveringly on Blackwood's chest. His face was streaked with soot, one arm held awkwardly against his side, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Drop your weapon, Ezra," Nathaniel commanded quietly. "It's over." For a tense moment, Hannah thought Blackwood might attempt to shoot despite being caught between two guns. His face contorted with hatred, as he looked from Nathaniel to Hannah and back again. "It's not over," he snarled. "You think anyone will believe a Mexican boy and a disgraced doctor over me? I have the railroad behind me. I have money and influence." "And we have witnesses," Hannah replied. "Pike is already in custody. He's confessed to knowing about the fire in Mexico, about your role in it." Doubt flickered across Blackwood's face. "Pike wouldn't betray me." Blackwood's hand tightened on his weapon, indecision plain on his face. Then with a movement so sudden it startled them both, he swung toward Hannah, firing as he did. Nathaniel's shot came an instant later, catching Blackwood in the shoulder. The railroad man fell, his weapon clattering to the ground as he clutched at his bleeding wound. Hannah rushed forward, her medical instincts taking over despite everything Blackwood had done. She knelt beside him, assessing the damage with practiced eyes. "It's bad," she said quietly to Nathaniel, who stood guard with his rifle still trained on the fallen man. "The bullet hit an artery. He doesn't have long." Blackwood coughed, blood speckling his lips. His eyes, once cold with hatred, now held a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or the terrible clarity that comes with imminent death. "Ramirez," he gasped. "The boy. I never meant—" "Save your breath," Hannah advised clinically, though her hands worked with gentle efficiency to staunch the bleeding. "Help is coming." Blackwood shook his head weakly. "No use." His gaze shifted to Nathaniel. "Hayes, my coat pocket. Papers." Nathaniel hesitated, then cautiously reached into Blackwood's coat, retrieving a small leather portfolio. "Railroad plans," Blackwood managed. "Proof Mexico wasn't the only place." He coughed again, more violently. "Names, dates, everything." Hannah and Nathaniel exchanged a startled glance. Blackwood was giving them evidence that would implicate not just himself, but the entire railroad operation in multiple criminal acts. "Why do I fall?" Nathaniel asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Blackwood's eyes found Daniel's scar in his fading vision. "Some debts." "Can't be paid," he whispered. "But the truth might help the boy sleep." His gaze moved to Hannah's unveiled face, to the scar he had mocked. "And you, nurse, your brother. He died brave, helping others. Deserved better than me living." With those words, Ezra Blackwood, railroad enforcer, arsonist, killer, closed his eyes for the final time. His expression no longer twisted with hatred, but strangely peaceful, as if in his last moments he had found a measure of the redemption he had denied others. Hannah checked for a pulse, then sat back on her heels, her face solemn. "He's gone." Nathaniel examined the portfolio Blackwood had given them. "These are real," he said in disbelief. "Detailed records of every illegal land seizure the railroad has conducted in 3 territories. Names of officials they bribed, families they displaced." He looked up at Hannah. "This is enough to stop them, to make sure what happened to the Ramirez family doesn't happen to anyone else." The sound of approaching horses signaled Cooper's arrival. As the sheriff and his men surrounded them, Hannah looked down at Blackwood's still form, feeling not triumph but a complex mixture of justice served and sorrow for a man who had found his conscience only at the end. "He couldn't undo what he'd done," she said softly to Nathaniel, "but in the end, he chose to do what was right." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do. Face the truth and try to make amends." Hannah felt a burning sensation along her upper arm where Blackwood's bullet had grazed her. But the minor wound was forgotten as she rushed to Nathaniel, who had sagged against the barn door frame. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, noting the dark stains spreading across his side. "It's nothing," Nathaniel insisted, though his pallor belied his words. "Just a flesh wound from last night. More concerned about you." Hannah helped him to a fallen log, easing him down before examining his injury. A bullet had indeed grazed his side, leaving a nasty but not life-threatening wound. More concerning was the evidence of blood loss and exhaustion. "You need rest and proper medical attention," she told him firmly. Nathaniel caught her hand as she worked. "Hannah," he said softly, "about William." "Later," she cut him off gently. "When you're stronger. When we're safe." He shook his head stubbornly. "No, I need to say this now." His grip tightened on her hand. "I'm sorry, so sorry, for William, for not being able to save him, for not telling you the truth when I recognized your name. Hannah stilled, looking into his eyes. You knew who I was before I arrived? Nathaniel nodded slowly. Not at first, but when your letters mentioned Boston and a brother lost at Fredericksburg, I should have told you. Should have ended our correspondence then. But I was selfish. Wanted a chance to. He trailed off, seemingly unable to complete the thought. A chance to what? Hannah pressed gently. To make amends, he finished quietly. To do some good for the sister of the man I failed to save. Hannah felt tears gathering behind her veil. You didn't fail him, Nathaniel, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I was there, remember? I saw how hard you tried, how impossible the situation was. You were there. Nathaniel looked confused, then understanding dawned. The nurse who tried to pull him from the fire. That was you. Hannah nodded, one hand rising to touch her veiled face. That's how I got this, she admitted, trying to save William after the artillery hit. But I was too late. We both were. Nathaniel's gaze softened with wonder and sorrow. All this time, he murmured, both of us carrying the same burden, the same guilt. Both of us hiding from the past, Hannah agreed, until fate or coincidence brought us together. Their eyes held, something unspoken yet profound passing between them. Then with trembling fingers, Hannah reached for the edge of her veil. Daniel asked me to be brave, she said softly. I think it's time I tried. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the veil, revealing her face to Nathaniel for the first time. The scar ran from just below her right ear, across her cheek to the corner of her mouth, a vivid, rippled testament to the fire that had claimed her brother. Nathaniel looked at her, truly looked, without pity or revulsion. His hand rose, hesitating briefly before gently tracing the path of the scar with his fingertips. Beautiful, he whispered, his voice filled with reverence. Hannah felt something break free within her, some final wall that had stood between her and healing. Tears flowed freely now, washing away years of shame and hiding. You don't have to say that, she managed through her tears. I'm not saying it out of kindness, Nathaniel assured her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. I'm saying it because it's true. Your scar is beautiful because it tells the story of your courage, your love for your brother. He took her hand in his, just as my shaking hands tell the story of my failure and my fear. Your hands don't shake anymore, Hannah pointed out, linking her fingers with his. Nathaniel looked down at their joined hands, wonder spreading across his features. No, he agreed softly. They don't. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Cooper had arrived at last, with a posse of townsmen behind him. But as Hannah moved to stand, Nathaniel held her hand fast. Hannah, he said urgently, I know our marriage began as a convenience, a fresh start for both of us. But I need you to know, he paused, gathering courage. I need you to know that somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real to me. Hannah felt joy rise within her, bright and unexpected. For me too, she admitted. Somewhere between your morning tea and your quiet strength, between Daniel's lessons and tonight's fire, you became real to me too. Cooper and his men were nearly upon them, but in that final moment of privacy, Nathaniel leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Hannah responded with all the emotion that had been building within her, the fear, the relief, the newfound hope. When they parted, Nathaniel's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. We have a lot to rebuild, he said, glancing toward the ruins of their home. Hannah followed his gaze, but where he saw destruction, she saw possibility. Yes, she agreed, squeezing his hand, but this time we'll build it together. No veils, no secrets, just truth. Truth, Nathaniel echoed, pressing a kiss to her scarred cheek, and healing. As Cooper and his men surrounded them, as the danger passed and the new day truly began, Hannah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Two wounded healers who had found in each other not just understanding, but the courage to begin again. Sheriff Cooper approached them, his expression a mixture of relief and quiet respect. Reckon Dry Creek owes you both a debt, he said, nodding toward Blackwood's body being loaded onto a wagon. Man like that poisons everything he touches. What happens now? Nathaniel asked. Justice, Cooper replied simply, and healing for everyone he's hurt. His eyes lingered briefly on Hannah's revealed face, then moved to Nathaniel's steady hands. Funny thing about scars, he added thoughtfully, they mark where we've been, not where we're headed. With that, he tipped his hat and moved away, leaving them to their newfound peace. And somewhere, she thought, William was smiling. As January's crisp clarity swept across the New Mexico territory, Hannah and Nathaniel stood amid the beginnings of their rebuilt home. The foundation had been laid, walls beginning to rise, tangible proof of their 3-month journey from strangers to partners. Winter would give way to spring, scars would fade to silver, and with each passing season, their shared story would continue to unfold. 1 year later, spring sunlight bathed the newly constructed Hayes homestead in a warm golden glow. Where once had stood a simple cabin, now rose a larger house with a dedicated wing that served as the only medical clinic within 50 miles. A hand-painted sign hung by the gate, Hayes Clinic, all welcome. Hannah moved efficiently between examination tables, her face bare for all to see. The scar that curved from her ear to her jawline had faded somewhat with time, but more significantly, it had ceased to be the thing that defined her. Patients, ranchers, townsfolk, travelers passing through, looked to her skilled hands rather than her marked face. Near the medicine cabinet, Nathaniel carefully measured powder into small paper packets, his fingers perfectly steady as he worked. Occasionally, husband and wife would pass each other, exchanging glances that held a world of private understanding. They worked as a seamless team, communicating in the shorthand of people who had built something meaningful together from the ashes of their past. "Dr. Hayes?" Daniel Ramirez called from the doorway, clutching a well-worn medical textbook. At 11, he had grown taller, his burn scars lighter but still visible. Unlike before, he no longer hid them beneath hat brims or shadows. "I've finished the chapter on setting bones. May I observe when Mr. Peterson comes for his splint change?" Nathaniel smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Certainly. You'll need to know this if you're going to be a doctor someday." Through the open window came the sound of horses from the expanded Ramirez ranch next door. Gabriel had become known for breeding the finest horses in the territory, with Sophia managing their growing business affairs. The charges against them had been dropped after Blackwood's death, when the railroad company, eager to distance themselves from scandal, had suddenly discovered that the Ramirez land deeds were legitimate after all. That evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset, Hannah leaned her head against Nathaniel's shoulder. "William would have loved this place," she said softly. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed, his arm tightening around her. "I think he would be proud of what we've built in his memory." In the distance, the silhouettes of Gabriel and Sophia could be seen walking along the fence line that separated their properties, a fence they had deliberately kept low and easily crossed. Children's laughter echoed as Daniel and the other young ones from town played in the fields between the two homes. The scars remained, on faces, on hearts, on memories, but they had become markers of survival rather than wounds that bled. And in this small corner of the New Mexico territory, two families had created something rare and precious, a home where healing in all its forms could flourish.